World War II caused an estimated 85 million deaths worldwide, about 3% of the global population at the time. The war cost the lives of both military personnel and civilians. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the war's end. What lessons can we draw from this global conflict? I'm Mike Walter. Let's take it full frame.
The premiere of a movie that brings memories of the horrors of World War II.
Somehow, photography has been employed as the most powerful weapon or tool to prove what really happened.
Millions lost their lives.
It's a huge boulder. For the first 10 days, we never found it. Finally, we searched the whole area and we found a boat.
Atrocities that marked one of history's darkest chapters.
We don't forget that past because we're not able to prevent something like that from taking place, and now we're a much more powerful country, and no one can run roughshod over us anymore.
The efforts to build a better system to resolve conflict.
It was a huge endeavor, and it culminated with the Charter of the United Nations. The Charter is a commitment to diplomacy and dialogue as a means to solve the problems and the challenges that we all face.
And the dangers posed by nuclear weapons.
This is what Americans were taught, that the bombs were not only necessary, they were morally good, they saved lives, especially American lives. The reality is very different.
Remembering, safeguarding peace. Next.
After earning more than $1 billion at the box office in China, the movie Dead to Rights premiered in the United States this August.
So this is Nanjing 1937.
Michael Berry, director of the Center for Chinese Studies at UCLA, has authored several books about Chinese media and culture. One of the books devoted an entire chapter detailing depictions of the Nanjing Massacre in books, film, and television.
Yeah, so there's actually a long history of feature films in China about the Nanjing Massacre. The earliest, most notable one is 1987's film. In English, it's called Massacre in Nanjing. The Chinese title is called 屠城水战, which is literally bloody evidence in the city of massacre. Now, the bloody evidence, of course, is pointing to a series of photographs. And the plot of that film is basically looking at a group of a Chinese photographer who develops a series of photographs depicting massacres committed by the Japanese. And he passes the photographs off to a series of other characters who preserve them, and each one dies in the process trying to protect the photographs and make sure they're preserved. You have other films like 1995, Black Sun, but the commonality here is the photography is the core to both Massacre in Nanjing, Black Sun, and somehow photography has been employed as the most powerful weapon or tool to prove what really happened. Now we ask, why do you have to prove what really happened? And that has to do with a long history of denialism on the part of the Japanese government, or sometimes not even the government, just high-profile or highly influential public figures in Japan.
For many in the audience, it was their first time learning about the atrocities committed by the Japanese army during the invasion of China in 1937.
我不希望用这个电影去传播暴力的噱头，去传播仇恨的种子，而是希望观众更多的立足于当下，去展望和平，珍惜现在的生活，因为请人去提醒他们铭记历史，珍惜和平。
For the Chinese ambassador to the U.S., the main takeaway from the movie was also a message of hope. and remembering the Allies in the global fight against fascism.
铭记历史是为了更好前行。在中国人民抗日战争及世界反法西斯战争当中，中美两国人民同仇敌忾，并肩作战，走出一条相互尊重、和平共处、合作共赢的新时期的正确的相处之道。
But how will it work for an American audience?
I don't think enough people know that we stood there for China and for the right reasons. And instead of looking upon them as adversaries, now we should look upon them as we were in the foxholes together. We banded together against fascism, that 80 years ago. And let's look forward and take that attitude again moving forward.
My next guest is Emmy Award-winning director and producer Tao Hai Bin, whose work has brought renewed attention to one of the darkest chapters of World War II, the Nanjing Massacre. Director Tao Hai Bin and his team are reviewing material for their next documentary.
这一块是南京日军攻占南京城以后，这一块是屠杀最严重的。
So you have so many images. How do you incorporate this in the documentary?
因为他很多照片本身是出版在他日本人的有一个叫《异人的昭和史》那本书里面。
The Nanjing Massacre occurred in 1937 after the Japanese army captured the city. I was in Harbin and saw just unspeakable acts there, unspeakable acts here. What do you learn about the human heart? How can these things happen?
日军在占领南京以后，主要是首先是放火烧了很多，对这座城市点火，然后是杀，然后是对妇女的强奸暴行，2万多起，然后这个抢夺文物，这个是杀，这个是抢夺我们很多文物，包括你看这个居民家的这个小孩的这个童车，他们都要抢，这是烧杀淫掠，基本上是这样的一个状态。
Looking out at this wall, you can't help but feel that each one of these stones holds a memory of war and recovery. After the massacre, Nanjing could have chosen a path of hatred. Instead, it chose healing. It remembers its painful past, but it's always looking forward. Here in this city, peace is much more than a slogan. It's a fiber built into the very fabric of this city as it continues to deal and live its history. The massacre is one of the most notorious war crimes committed during World War II.
它是1937年12月13日凌晨，日军破城，在另外一个中山门，在那儿破城。随后，整个日军大量的就涌入了南京城内，开始了对平民进行的屠杀、放火、强奸、抢掠一系列的暴行。特别严重的暴行时间大约是6个星期。
So many civilians killed and injured that way.
他们对放下武器的中国军队，一切都用刺刀刺，用机枪扫，然后再浇上汽油烧掉，毁命、毁尸，特别的残暴，而且是对放下武器的军人。在南京很多的这个妇女被强奸，小的只有7、8岁，大的60、70岁都有，女性被强暴。
A group of Westerners helped establish a Nanjing safety zone, which sheltered around 200,000 civilians and prevented more deaths.
做这个第一部片子是2015年嘛，讲外国人眼中的南京大屠杀。然后做前采的时候，那是我第一次去到馆里边，比较全面的去看到了这样一段发生在这个城市里的故事。当时的人，他们的经历是什么？他们的个体感受是什么？那像外国人眼中的南京大屠杀也是，就是我们通过当时留在南京的外国人的视角来了解这段历史。
A memorial museum was established to commemorate the atrocities of World War II. As visitors make their way through the memorial space, which of these exhibits do you think are the most deeply moving for the visitors?
我觉得这个纪念馆最重要的一块是我个人印象很深的是哭墙。每年的清明，我们这个遇难者的后人都会到这儿举行家祭。因为他们的先人在作为死难者，当时在南京大屠杀期间被杀害以后，不知道事故在哪里。原来祭奠只能在家里面进行家祭。我们纪念馆这面哭墙上面写满了遇难者的姓名。每年清明，他们一个家庭一个家庭都会在这里进行家祭。
How does being here differ from reading a book or watching a documentary about the Nanjing massacre?
它最大的一个特点是对历史资料文物的保存和利用，所以每一位参观者进来都会有一种很深很深的沉浸感。
Tai Haibin meets with his team at their production office in Nanjing. Talk to me about that feeling of winning for keeping this piece of history alive.
战争与和平也许是我们这个世界上一个永恒的话题。当今世界并不安静，连很多地方在有战争和杀戮，所以我们让人们通过这些历史事件曾经发生的这种人类的这些惨剧，我们不断地呈现给今天的人们。就是让人们更加珍惜当下，认识到和平的可贵。
His team is looking for new angles to develop their next documentary project. You know, walking through here, you're deeply moved by what you see, but why do you think it is that the Nanjing massacre doesn't resonate as much as, let's say, the Holocaust?
我觉得，特别是二战结束以后。其实国际社会和各个国家都以各种形式来悼念奥斯维辛集中营的遇难者和死难者。但是其实由于西方那种冷战思维，对南京大屠杀发生在中国的南京大屠杀这样一段历史刻意的进行消磨，特别是日本右翼通过各种形式活动，来想尽一切办法来抹杀和歪曲他们当年在南京犯下的这样的一个残暴行径的一种真相的这种抹杀。所以，其实这些年我们对于南京大屠杀的国际传播一直非常的注重，我们就是要让更多的国际社会、更多的人们来知道曾经。在二战期间，人类3大惨案之一。
Some members of the Japanese military were prosecuted at the International Military Tribunal for the Far East in Tokyo.
So the massacre happened first in this area.
其实我们这个团队一直在做关于南京大屠杀题材的这样一个纪录片，我们。聚焦过南京大屠杀的幸存者，聚焦过南京大屠杀的加害者，然后我们发现还有一个群体非常重要，就是当时留在南京的一些20多个外国人，他们是给我们提供了第三方视角。
On 9/11, I was on my way into work and I saw the jet slam into the Pentagon. I saw all these thousands of people die. That's always going to be here, that memory. Having to work on this and the importance of your work, but those memories, how do you, because it's not something you can switch off like a light switch, it stays with you. If your own mental well-being, how do you balance that?
其实我们作为创作者本身，我想每一位在个人的这种身心上都有一定的受到一定的这种伤害。其实我到现在我经常做噩梦，醒来就日本人那天占领南京城这样一个画面，我经常是噩梦这样醒。
So it's the balancing the enormous toll that it takes on all of you, but the importance of telling this story, the importance of the work, getting the story out.
而且我感觉，作为这样一个大屠杀发生地的这样一个纪录片人，也有责任把这种历史的真相还原给更多的人。
Tai Hai Bean received an Emmy for Scars of Nanjing. What's your hope when it comes to Western audiences as far as what they take away when they watch one of your documentaries?
其实我对于《南京之殇》这部纪录片获得第45届日经艾美奖，我并不是特别的介意，或者特别的高兴，而是我觉得高兴的是，在2017年12月13日这一天，南京大屠杀死难者国家公祭日这一天，在美国的主流平台进行播出。我说这个价值，或者这个对历史真相更多的向美国观众、本土观众来说，是非常有价值、有意义的。当然，能够获得第45届日经艾美奖，也是大家对这部作品价值的再一次的承认。我觉得是这样一个关系。
What lessons does Nanjing's tragic history provide for the world today, would you say?
其实每一次走进这段历史的深处，一次次去试图去还原、揭示、揭露南京大屠杀这样的一个历史真相，从我个人创作者本身是非常痛苦的一件事情。看被杀戮、被强暴、被抢掠，很多人性中的恶，我们今天在身处和平年代的人是无法想象。所以，其实，在我们每个人心里面，创作者本身也会造成很大的创伤感。但我想，即使在那样黑暗的一个时刻，还有很多人性之光在闪耀。这不管是当时留在南京的一些20几位外国人，他们亲历见证了南京大屠杀，当然也有我们中国同胞之间的守望相助，这些都是人性中的善，人性中的美。所以我们有时候感觉心里面非常痛苦的时候，我们就想想人，在大屠杀那样黑暗时刻，还闪耀着那么多人性的光芒。
Yawei Lu, a leading scholar on U.S.-China relations and Chinese history, offers a unique perspective on World War II from China's vantage point. We met at our studios in Washington, D.C. When you think about, the war crimes that occurred there at Auschwitz, they're very similar to what happened in Harbin. People were tortured and murdered, and yet I think you could walk down the street here in Washington, D.C., and no one knows about it. Why is that?
I think there are multiple reasons about that. Most of the Chinese at the time, they were running away from the brutality. So it was only the missionaries, foreigners that stayed in Nanjing. And now recently there are movies about their effort. But back then, this was not widely reported. I'm not aware of the rape of Nanjing until very late. There was no museum there to acknowledge what happened. 300,000, 400,000 Chinese, innocent Chinese were killed over there. And of course, the 731, that story was long overdue. It didn't come to light until very late. So all these details slowly came up to light. And finally, China acknowledged it. And now December the 13th is the National Mourning Day. If you look at when that started, it was very late, 15 years.
It is now my duty to call for a vote on the approval of the Charter of the United Nations.
The United Nations was founded in 1945 after World War II to promote peace and prevent future global conflicts. One of the things that emerged after World War II, of course, is the creation of the United Nations. And it seems as though one of the lessons China has gotten out of this is an embrace of multilateralism of the UN. Can you talk about what are some of the things that emerged as a result of the end of the World War II?
I think at the end of the war, we need to be grateful for FDR, who envisioned, an international organization that would be operating differently from the League of Nations that was created by President Wilson after World War I. And the lesson learned by FDR is you need to give big powers the veto power. Otherwise, these big powers, they're not going to participate in this multilateral arrangement. So that lesson was learned. And then we have the UN Security Council, we have the UN, we also have the 5 permanent members, and China. Actually, I think Roosevelt insisted that we need a big power from the Far East, and China played a very important role. I think it was, from the hindsight, it was a great decision. And also, it was a belated acknowledgement of the role China played in World War II.
As you look back in the past, during World War II and the cooperation that went on, as we move towards the future and the present, what can we learn from that relationship during those really troubled times and these troubled times that can help us moving forward?
Yeah, I think there are lots of lessons. Diplomacy is very, very important. All the diplomats that China had in the U.S. and how they work with American companies, how they work with American NGOs, how they work with American media people, how they work with ordinary citizens of the U.S., it created a different public opinion that called for the support of China. I think we do need to engage each other. We do need to try all our best to make the other side perceive us more objectively, because misperception leads to miscalculation, and miscalculation will lead to wrong decisions that will easily trigger conflict.
It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Mike, for inviting me.
Nazi Germany's genocide of Jews extended beyond Germany and Poland to many occupied countries across Eastern and Western Europe.
Esther was just 14 when she was taken to Auschwitz, a vast system of 40 concentration camps.
Nous sommes arrivés devant l'entrée du camp. C'était le camp de Birkenau qui se trouvait, donc c'était une annexe du camp d'Auschwitz. Et là, quand les portes se sont ouvertes, on a eu l'impression qu'on rentrait en enfer. Il y avait de la fumée partout, il y avait des odeurs nauséabondes. On voyait des cadavres le long de l'allée centrale. Enfin, c'était quelque chose. On voyait les chiens qui couraient dans tous les sens à sauter sur des personnes qui avaient l'air de véritables squelettes ambulants.
Somehow, Esther made it through 2 brutal winters, something few could survive. Today, she stands as one of the last living witnesses of the Holocaust.
Moi, je ne pouvais pas m'imaginer que j'arrive presque bientôt être centenaire et que je vois tout ce qui se passe actuellement et qu'on a bataillé pendant toute notre vie pour justement avoir une vie normale comme on a eu. Enfin, Disons que nous, on a quand même profité des bonnes années après la guerre. Hein. Il y a eu les 30 Glorieuses, on peut dire qu'on a bien vécu. Hein. La France était renommée, était réputée, était reconnue dans le monde entier.
Esther sees echoes of the past in today's world, a reminder that history never truly disappears.
Aujourd'hui, je vous lance un appel solennel en faveur de la paix. Les guerres actuelles ne se déclenchent pas uniquement pour des raisons politiques. Si l'on saurait faire aux conflits qui ensanglantent notre monde, on voit qu'elles ont aussi des causes idéologiques, ethniques ou religieuses. L'antisémitisme a toujours existé, mais c'était dans des milieux un peu intellectuels d'extrême droite. La parole n'était pas libérée comme maintenant, ça restait entre eux. Et puis de toute façon, ça a toujours existé. Hein. Tenez-vous bien, ne vous faites pas remarquer, les études c'est important, on a évacué les écoles de Paris. Je compte sur vous pour que lorsque nous ne serons plus là, nous qui avons connu les camps et pouvons certifier qu'ils ont bien existé, vous puissiez témoigner en notre nom à tous face aux négationnistes, aux révisionnistes et autres faussaires de l'histoire.
כן. ובבקשה, על השני תכתוב לי. התמונה הזאת מאוד מפורסמת, ואני נמצא בתמונה הזאת בעיגול, והתמונה הזאת צולמה ב-16 באפריל ב-45 בבוכנוולד, בבלוק 56, 4 ימים אחרי השחרור. פה, שאת התמונה הזאת...
He is one of the last living survivors of the Holocaust.
זה איש מהולנד. שמי נפתלי פירסט, נולדתי בברטיסלבה ב-18 דצמבר 1932. ועמדנו בתור אבא שלי, אח שלי ואני. אז יש לנו סריה כאילו של המספרים. מה שאני עושה למען שיזכרו את השואה ויזכרו את הקורבנות, את האכזריות של הנאצים ואת הזוועות שהמשפחה שלי עברה ויהודי אירופה עברו. זה מאוד חשוב שיזכרו. אני הייתי רוצה שאנשים ילמדו מהעבר מה שקרה, שילמדו את הילדים שלהם לשוויון בני אנשים, שאין איש שהוא מעל השני, שצריך להיות שוויון, שוויון זכויות ושוויון חובות.
In Monroe, Louisiana, an important piece of World War II history lives on through the legacy of a trailblazing ally to China.
Every time they went up in those airplanes, they risked their lives with these people that they didn't really have any commonality with, except that they were humans that needed help. He was 44 years old, and he was hired to do a survey of the Chinese Air Force. I know he was at the Battle of Shanghai in August. I know he was in Nanjing, and he witnessed those brutalities. He stayed to help the Chinese people. I'm Nell Calloway. I'm CEO, President of the Chenault Aviation Military Museum, and my grandfather was General Claire Lee Chenault. So we start out here with a letter that he wrote to my mother. It says, "Dearest baby," because she was the youngest of the 8 children. And it was written in June 22nd of 1937. And the war between China and Japan started in July of 1937, only a few weeks after this letter. And he offered his services to China. And he was put as chief air advisor to the Chinese Air Force. I think we all know what happened on December 7th of 1941 when the Japanese attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor. About 2 weeks later, on December 20th of 1941, this American volunteer group, which is what they were called at the time, they were able to shoot down 9 of 10 Japanese bombers over Kunming, China. They were the first Americans to have a victory in World War II. In China, it actually gave Chinese a sigh of relief knowing that the Americans were coming to their aid. And in America, it actually let Americans know that there were Americans that were able to have a victory in battle. Every time they went up in the air, they were outnumbered. They are actually credited with 299 Japanese airplanes confirmed, about that many unconfirmed, and they only lost 12 in actual combat of their own. They never lost a battle in the sky. He studied extremely hard when he was coming up with the fighter tactics. So he was unconventional, but once he got on a path, he never would stray from it. He was told that he did not possess necessary qualifications to become an aviator in World War I. He was rejected 3 times with the same rejection. And then finally he got his wings and became one of the heroes of World War II. I think the message that I would leave to the next generation is not to accept peace as just something that they're owed. Peace is a responsibility. It's a challenge, it's a job, it's all those words, but it's something that is vitally important, because if we don't maintain peace with the weapons of war that we have today, we won't have a world.
In that letter to us, President Xi proved to the American people that China does not forget its old friends. General Chenault, who commanded the Flying Tigers, was a brilliant tactician. He arrived 1 month before the Japanese start the Second Sino-Japanese War. It was his argument to bring American volunteers to fight in China until the time when Chinese pilots could be trained in the U.S. to fight the Japanese. His plans get to President Roosevelt, who approves it. So that summer, 100 pilots and 100 airplanes are sent to defend the Burma Road, and they're training during Pearl Harbor. So what he did, he had his 4 bomber pilots bomb the cliffs above the Japanese on the road, bomb the road, and prevent them from crossing on their pontoon bridges. The next 4 days, all the Flying Tigers were involved in machine gunning, bombing, what have you, and they drove the Japanese back 70 miles towards the Chinese-Burmese frontier. That's a very overlooked battle. At that time, it was probably one of the most successful uses of tactical air power in history. So the effect was the Japanese did not come back for 1.5 years. So you're a Chinese farmer, you're a Chinese businessman, You look up and for 3 years you hear an airplane engine. You panic, you're gonna go hide. Suddenly you look up and boom, boom. Japanese bombers blow up. It was extraordinary, the Chinese people. So what do they think of, how do they describe these pilots? These are flying tigers. So in that process, Chinese people made them the most famous pilots in history. I hope that the spirit of the Flying Tigers will be carried forth from generation to generation among the Chinese and the American people. China played an extraordinary role in defeating Imperial Japan. In their suffering, in their courage, they helped destroy the military power of Imperial Japan. Whenever an American pilot had gone down in Japanese territory, if the Japanese didn't get him immediately, the Chinese rescued him. Many of them died, but it was worth it, you know. If I can get this guy back, he can get back in the war and he can kill these guys and get them out of my country. That's a strong faith the Chinese people believe in themselves, and they believed in the American pilots. And that's what is so important about this 80th anniversary, that now people in the West are starting to realize and understand and hear about this relationship of sacrifice.
My next guest is filmmaker Fong Li, who directed a movie about the sinking of the Lisbon Maru. He reflects on the tragic events that followed when hundreds of POWs drowned or were shot by Japanese guards. It's one of the lesser-known tragedies from World War II. In 1942, the Japanese freighter, the Lisbon Maru, was transporting more than 1,800 British POWs from Hong Kong to Japan when it was torpedoed by a U.S. submarine. The ship sank in the East China Sea off the coast of Zhejiang Province. Only 700 POWs survived, many saved by local Chinese fishermen. Marine technologist and filmmaker Fong Li spent 8 years filling in this gap in history, culminating in his documentary, The Sinking of the Lisbon Maru. So this story, in a way, is happenstance. It's a conversation, you hear about this, and so that was really the inspiration, motivation behind this, right?
Well, I know a lot about history. But when the captain, a yard captain, told me about this story, I was so shocked. How could I never heard about this? When we went to the village, after we landed in the island, I checked with the local, villagers. And I said, yeah, it is true. I said, Jesus, how could I never heard about this? That's why when I come back to Beijing, I start searching on internet. I found a Tony Banner's book. So looks like it's a true story. But I also heard from the local people. Year 2005, and the Phoenix TV station came over, bringing a diving team from Hong Kong. They are trying to find the wreckage, the shipwreck. So nobody found it. I said, how could? It's a huge boat. 2016, went to the island. For the first 10 days, we never found it. So I started to suspect that the Japanese record was wrong. Because in the old days, how you position yourself, you look at a star, right? You use your compass. That's very inaccurate. So finally, we searched the whole area we found about. But how can I prove that's a Lisbon Maru? That's why next year, 2017, September, I bought so many equipment, a big team. The day we were evacuating from the sea back to land, it was September the 9th, 4:30 in the afternoon. The sun come down, because it's the east, the sun come down earlier. All of a sudden, you are touched. Straight below 30 meters below your deck, there are 828 boys. I show you some. Okay, this is all the awards. I really appreciate him.
Fong Li shows me a photo of one of the battalions transported by the Lisbon Maru.
Let me show you something here. You see this photograph?
Yeah.
I found this photograph at the first stop in Edinburgh from Royal Scots. This is the 2nd Battalion Royal Scots, 1941.
Wow.
This is the whole battalion.
Yeah, the closing credits. I mean, you took the time to list every one of them.
Yeah.
That has to mean a lot to the families.
Exactly. That's they worst. They deserve to be remembered.
Before fleeing the ship, the Japanese soldiers were ordered to seal the hatch where the POWs were held and shoot any prisoners attempting to escape. To piece together the story, Fong Li interviewed hundreds of family members of the POWs. What I found really intriguing is it was a world war, and you made it a world story because you went to Japan and you went to the United States, and it was amazing to me that you went to those lengths and folded all of that into the story. Talk to us about the thought process, how you got there.
Well, so once you decided to make a big screen, at the beginning, it was just trying to rescue the oral history, right? After you realize how big a scale of such family story, human stories, then you want to really, I would say, from every angle to, really record what happened. Because there's really curiosity. How could the U.S. hit the boat, right? And then also you heard about, the Japanese, the brutal action. That's why there's some findings from Tony Banna that helped too. From him, we found the martial court record. And what touches me was Captain Koyota's testimony. Not only he's forced to seal the hatch, he was even thinking about suicide himself. He was thinking about tied himself to the pole on the deck to sink to the sea, because this is the third boat got hit by Allies. So many people lost life, and he felt guilty. So that testimony triggered what I want to find their children's from his side. So during the war, not so many bad people, Even Koyota, Captain Koyota, he was forced to do that. Also, many audience asked me, could you find the Japanese military relatives? No, because their rank is so low. The leader of the 780 Japanese soldiers is only a lieutenant. He was killed during the war. There's no other war criminals being sentenced or be even questioned.
What's been the most rewarding aspect of working on this documentary and finally premiering it and getting reaction? What's been the best part for you?
Well, this best process is the audience movie. Because I love to be with the audience together. Because especially when I see young kids get touched, I'm so happy. Because the war is so far away from them. The history too long ago. But still, all those feelings touches everyone. I'll give you one story. My friend telling me her classmate took his son, 14 years old, to see Lisbon Maru, film. His son don't want to stay with dad. He went to front row. The son went 14 years, went front row. Before the film ended, he quietly come back, give dad a hug. This is a reward to me. Yeah, when you see young people, old people, families, they start appreciating the love and the family. Oh, I feel so awarded. That's what I want to share with everyone. So the biggest award to me, what I feel is finally I found this is the most important thing I have ever done in my life. I've ever done because I did something for 2,071 families. That's most important.
Well, this was a delight. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, leading to Japan's surrender and ushering in the nuclear age. I sit down with Peter Kuznick, professor of history and the director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. I met Peter Kuznick at our studios in Washington, D.C. Peter, I'm delighted to have you here. We're going to do a deep dive, but I wanted to kind of start on a personal level. I can remember years ago, my mother and I had an argument about nuclear weapons and Truman's legacy. And my perspective, of course, was, this horrible what happened. But hers was like, you have no idea what it was like to live during that period of time. She said, we just wanted that war over. It ended the war. It was a good thing. And I want to get your thoughts on just kind of that argument and its placement in time.
Yeah, I've been involved in that argument for many, many years now. And it's very frustrating that Americans don't learn real history. At the time, first Truman's comment was that this was revenge for Pearl Harbor. That wasn't going to fly. So then he started to argue that the bombs were necessary. The only way the U.S. could avoid an invasion of Japan was to use the atomic bombs. The only other alternative was for the U.S. to invade, and the Japanese were fanatics. They'd fight to the death, and we'd lose. He said Marshall told them, and he writes this in his memoirs, that the U.S. would lose 500,000 boys in the invasion. So therefore, the bombs are not only necessary, they're moral. They save lives. They not only saved American lives, then they later say they saved so many Japanese lives and Chinese lives by ending the war. But that's a total lie. But it's at the heart of this idea of American goodness and the American empire and American exceptionalism. The reality is very, very different, but the Americans don't learn this so much later.
Peter Kuznick has written several books, including Beyond the Laboratory, Rethinking the Atom Bombings, Nuclear Power in Hiroshima, and co-edited Rethinking Cold War Culture. Let's talk about the global balance of power. How did this shape that, the dropping of the bomb?
It was crucial in establishing American hegemony. The United States had a monopoly on atomic bombs till August of 1949, when the Soviets tested their atomic bomb. But to that point, we had a monopoly, and we're still going to have monopoly over delivery systems for more years after that. So the Soviets are going to try to catch up very quickly, because the United States tests its hydrogen bomb in 1952, and the Soviets test a prototype hydrogen bomb 8 months later. So it was 4 years before they caught up on the atomic bomb, but much more quickly before they caught up on a hydrogen bomb. We later discovered that wasn't a real hydrogen bomb, but it was close enough for anybody's purpose.
I know that in some respects, a lot of Chinese probably welcomed the end of this war because of the suffering. And I think there's even been some discussion that, this perception that the Japanese were victims because of what happened in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, but in many cases they were the victimizer. And these perceptions, give me your sense of how other countries viewed this.
You're right that not only the Chinese, but other Asians who were victimized by the Japanese welcomed the atomic bombs, partly because they believed that the bombs ended the war. The reality, as Oliver Stone and I have been arguing for years and shown and proven, is that the atomic bombs did not end the war. And not only did the atomic bombs not end the the Americans knew there were two other ways to end the war without use of the atomic bomb. One was change the surrender terms. The U.S. was demanding unconditional surrender, which meant to the Japanese the execution of the emperor as a war criminal. They weren't going to tolerate that. To them, the emperor was a deity. MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Command issued a background report in the summer of 1945 and said, execution of the emperor to them would be like the crucifixion of Christ to us. All would fight to die like ants. Almost all of Truman's advisors, military and civilian, urged him to change the surrender terms to tell the Japanese they could keep the emperor. And Truman refused to do so. The only one who really pushed him on that was Jimmy Burns. And Burns said, you'll be politically crucified if you let them keep the emperor.
Why do you think he made the decision?
Why did we use the bomb? It's a sad story, but we were sending a message to the Soviets that if they interfered with U.S. plans in Europe or the Pacific, they were going to get this and worse, much, much worse. And that is exactly how the Soviet leaders interpreted the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So in early June and July, former Japanese Prime Minister Hirota went to the Soviet ambassador in Tokyo, Malik, and effectively asked them to help get better surrender terms. So Malik writes back to the Kremlin saying the Japanese are desperate to surrender. So the Soviets knew better than anybody that the bombs weren't necessary, and they tried to figure out why they were used. And the only conclusion they could come up with this was a warning to them of what would happen if they interfere with U.S. plans.
Well, we're going to end it there. Peter, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Delegates representing 46 nations came to San Francisco on April 25, 1945, to chart the course toward realistic international cooperation to preserve peace. For 9 weeks in the spring of 1945, San Francisco was the center of men's hopes.
The 1945 San Francisco Conference galvanized the entire world.
Representing almost 2,000 million people.
It was a huge endeavor.
All at war when the conference was begun, they came with hope, born of common struggle.
And it culminated with the Charter of the United Nations. The Charter is a commitment to diplomacy and dialogue as a means to solve the problems and the challenges that we all face, as opposed to using power and strength. Reviving the Spirit of San Francisco is an exhibition. The exhibition features a series of photographs and videos of the 1945 San Francisco Conference. We called it Reviving the Spirit of San Francisco against the backdrop that I think is evident to anyone watching us today. Which is of division and deep geopolitical tensions.
The delegates of the United Nations came to design together machinery to end war, a curse which in 30 years had killed 40 million human beings.
We wanted those who visited the exhibition to see that amidst a much deeper crisis, those generations then had the courage to engage with each other, find a way forward, find a solution, and commit to dialogue, diplomacy, fundamental human rights, social progress, justice. There was an enormous optimism, an expectation that this new international organization would be the solution to many of the problems that drove the world to the Second World War.
There were many who doubted that agreement could ever be reached.
by these 50 countries, differing so much in race and religion, in language and culture. But these differences were all forgotten in one unshakable unity of determination to find a way to end war.
Once President Richard Nixon made his famous trip to meet with President Mao, the U.S. and the UN recognized China, and once that had happened, it rebalanced the Security Council. It meant that all the most powerful countries on the planet were now situated in those 5 slots, the 5 seats held by the veto countries. And it meant that from then on, the UN would be seen by the world as a truly representative body for security issues for the future.
Part of the intention with the exhibit is to remind all of us, visitors, politicians, diplomats, of the enduring legacy of the Charter, the commitment to resolve disputes through peaceful means, which is something that we can still aim for, as opposed to deepening conflicts and divisions amongst the members of the organization.
For more on this episode, go to america.cgtn.com/fullframe.
That's this edition of Full Frame, remembering the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. If you know of other visionaries you'd like to see on our show, email us at fullframe@cgtnamerica.com. From all of us here on Full Frame, thanks so much for watching.